So we're seeing music get more and more complicated. So now what I want to talk about are the limitations and problems that rhythmic modes and ligatures presented. We've already seen that they're super context dependent, right? Longs and brevs can mean different things in different contexts. And with the invention of motets, new problems cropped up on top of that because ligatures and the rhythmic modes only work for melismas. Text that was sung syllabically like motets are needed an individual note for each syllable, but notes on their own without ligatures just look like longs. So once folks started proselyting those substitute clausula, adding text to the substitute clausula and making motets, they would have to copy out the pieces twice. Once with the text, and it looks like each syllable gets where each syllable gets a single note, and they all look like longs. And then once without the text, so they could show what the rhythmic mode was supposed to be. And, I want to ask you all if you've ever written out a piece of music by hand. Some of you did for the practical assignment. And when you were done writing it out by hand, would you want to finish and then do it again? No. Neither of these smart guys. So they came up with a better way to write rhythm, which is called Franconian notation. Franconian notation, named after Franco of Cologne, who was the first person to sort of write this down and describe it that we know of. So with the earlier notation, sort of all the notes looked the same, and it was the ligatures that told you what the rhythmic grouping was, right? You had to understand how the ligatures work in order to turn them into rhythm, and this is very, very limited and annoying, full of exceptions and all the rest. Franconian notation, what this did was let you know the value of a note based on its shape. And this, as in terms of impact on music, this is like the move from neumes to notation on the staff, right? So Franco, besides giving them shapes, added some new note values. So this would be a double long. And then, of course, we had the long. The double long looks like a sort of long backwards quarter note. The double long over here, the long like a backwards quarter note. And then you have the brev, which is just a square without a stem. And then you also have a semibrev, which is like a diamond type shape. Again, these the brev and the semibrev, these were all familiar symbols from before. So was the long, and in transcription, the double long was usually transcribed like two dotted half notes tied together. The long was transcribed as just a dotted half note. Brevs were like quarter notes. Nope. Come on, you stinker. There we go. And semibrevs were like eighth notes, and they usually appeared in groups of three, like triplets. So now music can get even more complicated. And the last example I want to talk about is a really ingenious example of Concordia discourse. It uses part of a chant melisma like the others. In this case, from the same chant. So you can see down here, omnes, this bit is... did I not include the original? Oh, no, I did. It's this bit. Sorry. This stretch here, that melisma, which you can see with like the repeated notes here and the repeated notes here, all of this stuff. So it uses a chant melisma, and of course this is based on texted clausula, and all of that stuff comes from the cathedral, right? Notre Dame and the sort of cathedral school in the University of Paris. But we also see some other stylistic developments that take advantage of Franconian notation. So one of them is more rhythmic variety within the parts, right? Half notes, triplets, those would be semi-brevs, longs, semi-brev and brev, all sorts of stuff going on, just much more complicated within, and then more rhythmic differentiation between the parts. So you can see, the bottom voice has the longer notes, mostly moving in longs, and some brevs. Whereas, this is sort of in between. We've got longs, we've got semi-brevs and brevs. And then this has the top voice here has very few longs, many more semi-brevs and brevs. There's a kind of differentiation in roles, differentiation between parts. Another new thing that we see, though, is this. Let's zoom in a little bit. De Madame, Deus, Sumon, pour roi. What language is this? This is not Latin. This is French, and you don't use French for sacred verse. And then listen to the actual text that they are singing. From my lady comes the grievous pain which I will bear, and of which I will die, if hope does not keep me alive, along with the great joy that I have. What is this? Hopefully this sounds familiar. This is a canso. And that means trouvères, right? And here comes our old friend, Adam de la Halle, the greatest trouvère of all time, who studied at the University of Paris. And no disrespect, but this is much, much more intellectually interesting than Robin's Mem. And as far as combining disparate elements, so you have 3 different kinds of voices with different functions, all yoked together, and then you have the interplay of 2 love poems stacked on top of each other, and all of that on top of a chant in Latin. So let's just listen for a minute to see where motets got to by the end of the 1200s. You all get the idea. Now, this mixture makes a certain amount of sense, given what we talked about with the trouvères. So on the one side, organum moved from the monasteries, which were out in the boonies, to the cathedrals, which were in the cities. That's on the sacred side. On the secular side, the trouvère tradition moved from the castles and the courts, which were also out in the boonies, to the townsfolk who were living in the cities. And that educated class, which included Adam de la Halle, right, because he studied at the Paris University, that educated class that emerged in the 1200s would have been right in the middle of all of this, the secular on one side, the sacred on the other side. So by the end of the 1200s, the motet was a combination of new, sophisticated ways of notating music that allowed for greater complexity and the mixing of true traditions, one sacred and one secular. And this fired the imagination of that newly educated class. But what we're going to see in the next chapter is the cycle of more notation, more problems. And so we'll start next chapter by looking at the last excerpt of chapter 5, which again takes complexity to the extremes and is going to show the weaknesses of the new Franconian notation. I'll put the quiz in the next video.